October 27th, 2022. This is the Arlington County, Virginia Board of Equalization hearings. We have 6 cases on the agenda. The first case is RPC 200100026 at 535 North Pollard, and we have Mr. Blake Warren and Mr. Jeremy Chitlick representing the owners. You can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you very much, Board. I would like to direct your attention to page 39 of 137 of the county's response memo. And it shows our summary of facts. This is the Birchwood Apartments located at 525 to 545 North Pollard Street, and it is consistent of a single tax RPC. The original 2022 assessment for this property was $39,263,400. The county is recommending a revised value of $36,117,600. The property was originally built in 1982. There was an addition added in 2000. It's 97 total units. It is a multifamily apartment complex located in the Ballston and Virginia Square submarket. It's one building, 4 stories, and sits on 2.67 acres. The community offers a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, and is located 4 blocks from the Virginia Square and George Mason Metro Station, and 6 blocks from the Ballston Metro Station. I'd like to now direct the board's attention to page, I think it's 3, the county's 2022 apartment summary and historical I&E, which shows the actual reported income and expenses for the prior 4 years from 2018 to most recently 2021. This property, the original assessment value of $39,263,400 represented a 6% increase from the prior year. Now the county's revised test column represents a 2.7% decrease. However, it should be noted that the actual NOI that was reported year over year from 20 to 21 is actually a 14% decrease year over year. Now, just looking at the historicals for the past 3 years, you'll see a 3-year downward trend in the total apartment GPR from $2,987,800 in 2019 down to $2,981,000 in 2020, and most recently $2,796,000 in 2021. The county's test column on column F, they revised it down, but it's still $190,000 higher than what was actually reported most recently in 2021. The county has also included a rent roll analysis on page 6. It goes from 6 to 7, showing the average unit rents for the 1 bedroom and den, and 2 bedrooms. Those are all lower than the county's revised worksheet that can be found on page 5. If you took those averages and used those averages in the county's new test column, it would result in a gross potential rent of $2,895,612. So again, around $100,000 below what the county's revised test column is showing. Effective gross income has been down year over year. Again, we're showing a downward trend each of the last 3 years from $3.17 million in 2019, $2.96 million in 2020, and most recently $2.49 million in 2021. That's $472,000 higher than the county's test column in F in their revised test column of $2,962,771. Operating expenses in 2019 was 32% of effective gross income, 34% in 2020, and most recently 43%. The county's revised test column uses a operating expenses of 38%. NOI, each of the last 3 years, again, we're seeing a large downward trend, $2.15 million in 2019, $1.95 million in 2020, and down to $1.426 million in 2021, which is again around $480,000 higher than the county's revised test column used to calculate their revised value of $36,117,600. So again, those are kind of the facts of the case and kind of what we laid out the last time we spoke here, and what we discussed in last year's assessments that COVID was not a one-year blip. We're seeing a significant downward trend that's expected to continue into the future, and we're hoping that the board considers this. Thank you.
The only thing I want to point out, last week when in deliberation, we kind of talked about, well, does the value make sense? And you looked at a price per unit, and they were at $360 a unit. This one is a 2000 built in 2000 mid-rise building that has basically 4 years of declining income, or 3 years of declining income after a year that was essentially flat, and it's at $404,000 per unit, which is quite aggressive as compared to the other Ditmar properties. And again, the assessor did the analysis on the rent roll and then used higher numbers across the board to show that the income at the property, the gross potential income, is $225,000 higher. Greg Rains is on as well. Greg, we're on Birchwood. Anything you want to discuss here? We just kind of hit on the fact that the reported rents are down and the NOI went from 1.9 to 1.4, and that's not because of I think manufactured vacancy like was claimed last week. Anything you want to talk about on Birchwood?
No, I wasn't in the room, so I didn't hear everything. But yeah, I mean that property just had an issue staying occupied, low rents. We haven't climbed out of that hole at all, and higher expenses like we saw last week across the board. So no, same story.
Yeah, the same story but magnified here.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Thank you. I just want to point out first, there are two small errors on the summary page. First one is just a heading column. Column F, I put down DREA revision 2021. It should really read 2022. The other error is due to column E, the operating year 2021. I'm not familiar with how Ditmar reports their vacancy when they submit their INEs, and so I incorrectly inputted the vacancy wrong. So if you subtract out on column E $244,005 from the vacancy, or remove it, let's put it that way, that's going to increase the EGI and the reported NOI, and I'm not going to state them on this open air environment. You'll have to do the math yourself, and I apologize. As for this property, we're just knowing, yes, we did a rent roll analysis, and we were projecting what would the rent be for January 1, 2022, and that's what we displayed in the column F. Our vacancy that we used is pretty much in line with what's being reported. And looking at our expenses, we pretty much tried to use the same expenses that were being reported for January for 2021, and hence the reduction that we came up with was $36,117,600. Please note that the agent is including $20,000 in their replacement reserves. We already account for that in our cap rate. So I just wanted to make note of those items. Chris, is there anything that you would like to offer? Any comment?
Yeah, sorry about that. Essentially, just kind of echoing what Ms. Roskin just reported. Unfortunately, she isn't quite aware with Ditmar's, I would say, unusual way of reporting their INE vacancy, where they report a total number and then essentially you have to back it out. So the total number reported for the first line of vacancy is the entire amount. The amount listed for rent loss and concessions then has to be backed out of that amount. Unfortunately, Ms. Roskin double dipped, if you will, and essentially added it twice. And I don't believe you'll hear any dispute from that from the agents. So essentially the EGI was squashed a bit and the NOI as well. Importantly, though, and I apologize, we're going to kind of go all over the place here. One of the notes as far as rent potential, we've talked about this in every case we've had so far this year. The rent roll is showing the rents as of December 31st. I think it's logical, and we've grown these rents in every case we've heard, and modestly. We're talking 1%, 2%. Very much what's achievable based on the historic performance of the property, and again, just based on logic of what we've seen over the years and what they've achieved. So we don't assume that the rents will stay static as of December 31st, 2021. We do believe that those would grow, and that's what we've done virtually every case you've heard this year. I would also point out, and it's something that went over very quickly, was the operating history. Ms. Roskin was quite generous, in fact, suggested and projected a OPEX that was higher than what was achieved in 2021. 2021's number was $50,000 or so higher than what was achieved in any of the other 4 years. As you know, what we tend to do is stabilize those numbers and look at them over a 3-year period. When 2021 comes on, we place more weight on 2021 and less on 2018. Regardless, that still probably was a bit more aggressive than necessarily would have been. So ask you to take that into account as well. But looking over again at the history of the property, looking again at the unnaturally low NOI as seen in column E, we do believe that the revision offered by the county is appropriate at $36,117,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? No? Oh, Mr. Lawson.
Yes, I have one for Lori. In your note, you have the county has included 0.2% in the cap rate for replacement reserves. How much would that end up being as far as dollars?
As far as dollar wise,
Yeah, in other
2%.
words,
Okay, I guess you'd have to
Mr.
cap.
Lawson,
Right.
yeah, if I can get that for you. So essentially, you're going to take the value indicated, 36,117,600, multiply that by 0.2. You're going to get 72,235, which, as you can see, is obviously assumes a much higher rate than is assumed by the owner. And then obviously, quick math, you can divide that by 97 and get the per unit. So it's a little above.
So you're giving pretty much everyone that has apartments. They like in this particular apartment project, you're assuming a reserve of 72,000.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Metzgen.
For the department, I just that both of you went over this and I'm missing something somewhere. The concessions number that was in essence or allegedly double counted and then backed out. And I mean, what I'm seeing in their 2021 reporting, the appellant said that $244,000 of concessions, and I see in your columns D and F that you have zero. You stand by that concession amount that they split out is, if I'm correct, is in the vacancy amount or somewhere else you've accounted for it?
Well, I'll attempt at making a comment about this, and then I'll let Chris make sure that I did it right. When they report their vacancy, they put a total number at the top, and then they go and break it out below. So basically, they're doubling it. Okay, and I didn't realize this was how Ditmar reports their vacancy. So really, the vacancy is $20,179. The concessions are $210,045. And then there's another breakdown of concession of $33,960. So that comes out to a total of $264,184. And that's what the agent is reporting also. They're backing it up. It's just, I'm not familiar with Ditmar and how they fill out our form and didn't recognize that the way they put the numbers in. Let's put it that way.
But you stand by your column F though, right? Your
Yes.
revision.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, column F, yes,
Yeah.
not E.
Okay, thank
E
you.
should be higher, let's put it that way.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'd like for the applicant to respond to that, because the reason I say that is I'm looking at this whole chart, and we've had total VC and vacancy every year. And so I wonder if what the county's saying is in fact accurate. I'd like for the
Yeah.
applicant to respond.
Yeah, Barnes, our column G and her column E would be the same, but she put our vacancy in twice. So if you took our column G and added the 20,000 in replacement reserves back, our column G and her column E would be the same numbers. So it's not that we double counted it and we're trying to take double vacancy. It's that she double counted it and realized she made a mistake and then fixing it. And Lori, that's where we are, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's,
So we're not saying we want double vacancy. We didn't ask for double vacancy. It's just her column E. So if you want to know what column E should read, it's column G, but they're not giving us the 20,000 reserves. So you add it back, and that's the true NOI that should have been reported in 19.
Well,
well, we're not disputing that. We're just discussing the vacancy right now, that it was not reported, or was not displayed properly. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, but she's saying it's higher, but the number that it's higher is still $250,000 less than column F. The actual, if E was reported correctly, E would be 250,000 less than what is being given in column F.
So,
Mr. Lawson.
yeah, Jeremy, in other words, the main difference between you and the county is cap rate. Is that correct?
No, it's not. It's the rent. The main difference is the gross potential income. The true gross potential income, which is correct in column E, was $2 million. Well, you'll see what it is in column E. What
Right.
they're using in column F is $225,000 higher. So what they're saying is your rents, your apartment rents, which you can see in column E, which is actually reported. We think you can actually get higher than that. We think you can get higher than what you got in 2020. We think you can get what you can get in 2019. But on the next page where you go to the rent roll to see the rents, it's because they're using rents higher than the property can achieve. That's the big difference in the case. Yes, we are going to the cap rate issue, which is it a mid-rise, it is a low-rise? We didn't bring it up. We've lost it enough, but it's still a real issue that could take place if we go forward. The big difference in this case, basically, if you took their cap rate and applied it to column G and gave their replacement reserves back, that would be capping column E if they had done column E correctly.
Okay.
Okay.
Asked and answered. Any other questions? No? Okay. Ms. Roskin, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Sure. So basically, we believe that column F, the reconstructed column F is the best approach at 36,117,600. I'm just reiterating column E. I made an error in displaying the vacancy. You need to remove the $244,005. That will increase your EGI by $244,005, and it also increases the NOI by $244,005. I'm not going to state what the amount is, but I'm going to rely on you to do the math. So whatever you see the NOI in column E, add $244,005. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And gentlemen, if you take a minute to wrap up.
So, and I think we're not really contesting that there was an error on column E. If you look at what was reported on the income and expense survey that's included on page 123 of 169, it backs up kind of what Lori said. It's EGI would be 2.73 million instead of 2.489, and then NOI would be 1.67 million, which is basically the difference that Lori discussed. Now, even comparing those two and the county's revised test column at 2.73 million, we're still $230,000. The county's still $230,000 higher than what was actually reported for EGI in 2021, and similarly 230,000 plus for NOI at 1.6 million compared to the county's 1.9 million. So again, it's still substantially higher than what the property was able to achieve in 2021. We're showing this continued downward trend. Expenses are rising. while rents cannot keep up. So again, we're hoping that the board considers the actual most recent 2021 financials.
Right, we're at a value. We're at NOI of about 1.67 is what the NOI comes to in column E if they've done it correctly, but they're still applying 1.89 to the assessment on the property to get to a value of over $400,000 per unit for this property.
Okay, thank you. It's just among the board members now. What's everybody think on this? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my thought and see if anyone agrees. I think, you know, I know that rental rates have been going up, and I think COVID has actually generated an increase in rents and demand for residential rental units, and so I don't necessarily agree that COVID has had this dramatic impact on the residential rental. However, I look at it, and we've gone from 2796 to 2987, and you know, let's just, I mean, you take a screenshot of the rental situation of a Ditmar or any project, and you're going to have year-long leases that have to expire. And so I just wonder, and I guess I'm going to throw out there, I think maybe the jump in anticipated income is too high. And I'll see if anyone else agrees.
Okay, Mr. Yates. Turn your microphone on, please.
I'm sorry, Barnes, but look at it and compared to 2019 and 2020 on what the rental income was and the GPI. You know, all right, COVID's, I don't want to say over, but that's what they're kind of saying. And rents are going up, and I think that's in line with the prior history.
Okay, other folks? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I mean, I thought initially maybe the rental rates were a little high on the county's part, but then you go back and if you, it's above the rent roll on January 1st average, but then you get that 8% vacancy credit, and they've only got 2 vacant units on that date. So effectively, they're actually below their rent per square foot on average. The county's a little bit below what the actual rent roll shows. So I'm okay with the county's reduced number.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, you just wanted to share pretty much what Mr. Hoffman just said. You know, I looked at the rental rates that they are getting, and I think what the county used to reconstruct that, the revision, you know, I don't really see that they're out of line, or I think they're pretty much what they're getting. So, you know, looking at just the rental rates, which makes the gross amount that they're getting, I'm okay with it. I'm fine with the revision.
Okay. All right. I think we're got a consensus here. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the revised numbers of the value.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second that.
Okay. Motion and a second by Mr. Penaranda to reduce to 36,117,600. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The assessment's reduced to the county's revised number of 36,117,600. Thank you. Okay, the next 2 cases, Ms. Ruskin has said that we'll hear them together. Obviously, we'll have to vote on them separate. Does the appellant agree with that?
Yeah, they're reported as one economic unit, and that's how we filed the appeals as well.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the next case are RPC 1702613 and 014. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes. If you need to take a little bit longer, we'll certainly give you some latitude since we're hearing both of those at once. But we'll start the timer at 8 minutes and see how that works out.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to direct the board to page 56 of 169, which is our summary of facts for this property. These are the 16 Quinn apartments located at 1726 to 1730 16th Street North. It's consistent of 2 RPCs, and as we just stated, the owner reports these on one survey and treats them as one economic unit. So we're fine with them both being heard at the same time. The 2022 assessment currently is $1,595,100. The board, or excuse me, the county is recommending a value revision down to $1,425,000. These are older apartments, originally built in 1940, 8 total units. They are garden style apartments in the Roslyn submarket, 2 total buildings, and each of them 2 stories, and sits on a quarter of an acre. The 8-unit apartment community consists of 2-bedroom apartment units, all 8 of them. I'd like to direct the board again to the county's 2022 apartment summary and historical I&E summary sheet. I believe it's located on page 3. The original value of $1,595,100 was a 3.5%, 3.62% increase from the prior year. The county's test column is now representative of a 9% decrease from the prior year. However, it's important to note that the actual NOI at the property that was reported in most recently in calendar year 2021 decreased 77% from the prior year. As you can see, the gross potential rent for the property has remained pretty stable each of the last 4 years. This one really struggled with vacancy in the most recent year. Experienced calendar year vacancy of 14%, and then as of 1/1/2022, the property was 12.5% vacant. We increased our stabilized vacancy from 7 to 10% in our pro forma that you'll see in column G to recognize the above market vacancy at this location throughout the 2021 calendar year, and also as of the valuation date for the 2022 assessment. Effective gross income was stable in 19 and 20, and then you see that large drop there in 2021, 164,000, 168,000 in 2020, and then it drops down to 147,000. Operating expenses, again, we're seeing a trended increase. As we stated before, costs are going up 39% in 2019, 42% in 2020, and most recently 85% in 2021. Again, that increase is up substantially in no large part or no small part due to obviously the very high vacancy there that was reported. Operating the net operating income for the past 3 years has been on a steady decline as well. 100,000 in 2019, down to 97,000 in 2020, and then it drops to 22,600 in most recently in 2021. The county has not increased their vacancy rate. They're still using a 7% vacancy rate in their revised test columns, and in addition, they're using a 45% expense rate. We've trended that up and used a stabilized rate of 55% for column G and the appellant's pro forma. We're hoping that the board recognizes the above market vacancy this property has struggled with since COVID and trying to lease these units back up. Jeremy, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add, or Greg and Sophie.
Greg, I don't know. Do you want to talk real quick about this case or these cases?
Yeah, I mean, this one, it's important. But I kind of wanted to touch on, so last year in these cases, we had seen a decrease in our rents and our occupancy revenue, NOI, started seeing increases in expenses for the 2020 year, and very, very, very consistently by this board, we were told that we understand next year's going to be worse. We're hearing you. We see it on the rent roll, but that'll be taken care of next year. That'll be looked at next year. That'll be next year's NOI, and then that's the time where this COVID effect is reflected. And then we get to this year, and it's like, well, we don't really think. It seems like COVID's over. I mean, I think I've heard that COVID was a good thing for rentals. And maybe that's true if we look back over a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year deal. I don't know. Mortgage rates are up. That's great for rentals. However you want to say that. But we had to listen last year to every case that 2021 would be looked at for 2021. And now it's being looked at like, well, look at 2017, look at 2018, look at 2019. And the rents, their achieved rents, they're going to get back to those. But that's not where we're at. And so I guess maybe I don't understand how last year every hearing was next year will be dealt with next year. There's got to be a 2-year trend. Well, you see a 2-year trend, 2020 down, 2021 down. But now you're saying, well, but it's going to go back up. But last year it just seems like we're hearing a different solution or different answer than we heard last year very consistently. And I don't understand how that's equalization if every one of our properties that we brought forward has shown a lower NOI than you're saying we had, and you continue to say that it's fine. Whereas last year it was the opposite. So I just don't, I mean, this 16 Quinn, we could talk about it specifically, but that was what the conversations were every hearing last year. And now it's totally different.
All right, well, we don't need to hammer that home, but obviously put that out there. It's probably more relevant for last case than the rest of them today in the season than 16 Quinn because it's small. But you have this on 16 Quinn. Again, we've got a small downward trend. We're not talking about the biggest case in the world, but there's not a lot of units here, so it does affect it pretty good. And open any questions if you have them.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Okay. First of all, this is really simple with this particular case. Take a look at our columns F1 and F2. This is our revision for both of these properties. Take a look at what we use for income. It's in line. In fact, it's actually less than what they reported for 2021. Now, our vacancy is 7%, and they are reporting something more, but we believe that is due to them taking offline a couple of units so that they can remodel or, renovate the property. That brings me to my next topic, which is the expenses. If you look at the bottom of, and once again, this is the summary page. You look at the bottom, I made a comment and about how the expenses being reported are 300 to 400% higher than any of the preceding years. Okay, so the owner has reported capital improvements as a reoccurring expense. And if you look below that comment, you'll see where I broke out those expenses and you can make a comparison. Take a look at 2018, what they're reporting for maintenance and repair. Look at 19, it dropped. Look at 20, it's still less than 2018. And then all of a sudden, 2021, it's 3 times the amount, okay? And the same thing goes for the other expenses that I listed before. This is a renovation. All right, so our income is in line. It's fine. The expenses, our vacancy is stabilized vacancy that we're using for all garden apartments. But we feel that our expenses, what we use for expenses are in line. Take a look at the history, and that the owner is just reporting they're including their capital improvements in as a reoccurring expense. Now I am going to reserve the rest of my time for Chris to make a brief comment. Thank you.
Yeah, we just wanted to note, I think the board understands, and we want to try to explain as adequately as we can to Mr. Rains, the difference between a fee appraisal and ad valorem mass appraisal property tax is going to be that the adage that we've talked about so many times, 1 year does not an assessment make. You must look at this property in a stabilized nature. That means that we're not going to just look at the last year and capitalize it, as some of these agents will do. It's inappropriate. You must look at what the potential of that property is. You bring into real life knowledge of the sort of what's going on, the battle plan, if you will, of what's going on at that time. And yes, it is appropriate to bring in things like COVID and people staying at home. I think the board will quickly note this property has been historically amazingly stable as far as occupancy. They've averaged 2% vacancy and concession loss from 2018 to 2019 to 2020. It was only in 2021 did we see this disruption. Obviously, as we note, it's going to be felt in a property that has 8 units. Any change is going to be a large change. But again, when we look at this historically, we can see that the effective gross, the gross potential and the effective gross grew 4 years in a row. The operating expense, we do acknowledge, did also grow 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row if you count 2021's. But again, at a very slow pace. Differences of some $6,000 a year. Again, we caught that, we noted that, and stabilized it in our revisions. But again, as the board has also noted, we don't include capital improvements and things like that. Things of a nature of 400% increases should alarm us, should catch our attention, and should cause questions to be asked. Ms. Roskin did ask the owners the questions and received notification that essentially these were capital improvements. We don't dispute the idea of a property, especially an older property, needing repair. But again, we've done a good job. I believe we've done a good job of trying to stress the annual repair and maintenance from those that are allocated reserves for replacement or capital improvements. The annual repair and maintenance at this property is very much in line with Ms. Roskin's revision, as you can see in columns F1 and F2. We do believe that the property supports this revision. Again, if we look at the historical stabilized nature of this property, Ms. Roskin is very much in line. And in fact, you could even argue that her OPEX projections were high. The GPI projection is low. It's essentially spot on with what they did. And that's, again, given that years 18, 19, 20, 21 all grew. So given that we've essentially accepted the idea that rents will increase at least modestly, 1%, 2%, we do believe that the revision as captured in columns F1 and F2 should be confirmed at $1,425,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? No? Okay, any final comments, Ms. Roskin?
I just really want to reiterate that we feel that columns F1 and F2 portray the proper value for the property this year at $1,425,000. And just to recognize that column E, they're reporting 85% in expenses, and this brought my attention. So once again, I broke out the expenses that were being reported down at the bottom, and you could see that they are reporting an increase of 300% to 400% higher than any preceding year. And so our expenses that we're using at 71,700 is very much in line and gradually increasing, as you can see, for 2018, 19, and 20. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes. So in response to the county, if you look at column G, we're not capping the actuals from what was most recently reported in 2021. The actual vacancy, again, that was reported in 2021 was 14%. We're using a 10% vacancy rate. We're acknowledging that this property experienced substantial above market vacancy, but the county is not acknowledging that at all. They're just saying, okay, it's stabilized just like everything else, and we'll use our 7% per our guidelines. The same thing with the operating expenses. We're not using in our column G requested expense ratio the actual expenses of 124,000 or 85%. We're using a stabilized rate of 55% to acknowledge, as Greg has stated previously, some of these increased costs due to the labor costs and payroll increases needed to maintain the property. So again, we're not capping the actuals here. We're acknowledging the impact that the vacancy has had on this property, as well as, again, this trend you're seeing of overall expenses. Greg, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that before we wrap up. He might not even be on.
Yeah, he's under Sophie, but it sounds like they're muted. So we only have a minute. Let's let it go.
It is up, Mary.
Sorry, I was muted, but that's fine. Thank you, Blake.
Okay. All right. It's just among the board then. Where is everybody on these? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I thought I would just share or point out that the zoning of this is already 615, and that the zoning for this eventually is going to yield a much different development than what is in front of us right now. And just on a by right, I think you could probably achieve either 2 or 3 more units through a use permit process, or not by right, but through a use permit process. You could probably increase or add on at least a couple of units. When you look at the per unit value, 8 units, and the assessment is 1,567,000. That's right at 200 a unit. So I don't see anything wrong here.
Okay. Other folks? Mr. Matzkin.
Excuse me, for a couple of different reasons. I agree with what Barnes just said. This is pretty steady state stuff. Apparently, reportedly, the owner did what owners do, and that is upgrade some apartments a little at a time. It's a prudent business practice. And it's they only took a couple of apartments offline, but there's only a little more than a couple total. So the percentage looked big. There's no reason to carry on that percentage of vacancy out into the future based on this prudent business practice. So inflating the vacancy allowance later for what they did prudently in 2021 doesn't seem to make much sense to me. I also saw the income. The county didn't even bump up the income 2%. It was marginal. It was a small fraction of 1%, and inched up very, very little the operating expenses. Again, showing a very stabilized property. The bottom line is, though, that the assessment goes down 9%. That's from the revision for this year versus what was actually assessed last year. And that's very much within what we see chronically in apartment buildings. It does, I think, therefore, reflect a bit a slowdown of COVID, but certainly nothing's falling off the cliff. So I like the revision as is.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, I agree with what Ken just said. Originally, I looked at the vacancy, but we're only looking at a property that has 8 units. So anytime you're going to have 2 units vacant, it's like 25% of it, and it's not going to be all the time, And the county's using the 7%, which is an equivalent of having 1 unit vacant all the time. So I'm totally okay with the revised assessment.
Okay, Mr. Metzger.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Jose reminded me of one other thing. In years past, when it was full up, the owner got the benefit of a standard vacancy rate, which was higher than the actual vacancy. And now this year it's lower. And but the overall, the owners, like many owners, have gotten the benefit of just standard mass appraisal write-offs, if that's the right word for vacancy. So I still think it's very fair. Thank you.
All right, anything contrary, or would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to the revised number of 1,425,000, and that's for both RPCs. So it will be half for each at 712,500.
Okay, so we're going to just vote on the 013 number. So it's 712,500. Do I have a second for that motion? Okay, Mr. Matskin is a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. That is reduced to the county's recommended number of 712,500. And on the second unit ending in RPC 014, Mr. Penaranda has motioned to accept the 712,500 as the county's revised number for that unit. Mr. Matskin, do you second that? Okay, just to keep it consistent. All in favor? Aye. Okay, so that too is reduced to the county's recommended number of the 712,500. Thank you. All right, moving along to the fourth case on the agenda, RPC 200130227 at 4301 Henderson Road. Mr. Warren, you can start with 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to, again, start on page 37 of 213, which is our summary of facts. 37 of 213 of the county's response memo. This is the Henderson Park Apartments located at 4301 North Henderson Road. It consists of one tax RPC. It is currently assessed for 2022 at $31,728,100, and the county is recommending a revision to $30,492,700. The property was originally built in 2012. It is a multifamily apartment complex, 66 total units in the Ballston, Virginia Square submarket, one building and 4 stories tall. Again, kind of talked about this previously. The county classifies this as a mid-rise, and this will be within the next case that we do too. Based on, I guess, some prior precedents, we're not going to get into that argument and focus more on the actual reported income and expenses at this location. The property is located south of North Glebe Road and the intersection of North Henderson. And from there, I'll direct the board, please, to page 3, which is, again, the county's 2022 apartment income and expense summary. The 2022 recommended value of $30,492,700 is a 3.7% decrease from last year's 2021 final assessment value. However, again, year over year from 20 to 21, the actual NOI reported decreased 8% from the prior year. Gross potential rent for the apartments, if you look at the historical gross potential rent at $2.33 million in 2019, increased slightly in 2020 to $2.371 million, and down $170,000 to $2.2 million in column E for the calendar year 2021. In the county's revised test column, they're using an gross potential rental income for the apartments of $2,350,200. The county, again, has included a rent roll analysis on page 6 and 7 of their response, showing the average rents provided in the 1/1/2022 rent roll. The average of those rents, if annualized, would calculate to total rental income of $2,281,044, which is, again, significantly lower than the $2,350,200 that the county is using in their revised test column. The EGI, if you look in comparison to the county's revised value, again, this has been downward trending each of the last 3 years. $2.4 million in 2019, $2.35 million in 2020, and $2.2 million most recently in 2021. That's $97,000 higher than the county's revised test column in column F for the effective gross income. Operating expenses, again, we've seen an elevated level over the course of the last 3 years, 28% in 2019, 27% in 2020, and most recently 29% in 2021. The county increased their expenses from 27% to 28.5%. And again, on a ratio basis, it's still not the actual reported expenses. We've been seeing an increase, as we discussed, in operating expenses year over year, and we'll continue to see it in the foreseeable future. Net operating income, again, we're experiencing a 3-year downward trend, 1.75 million in 2019, 1.7 million in 2020, and then most recently 1,564,000 in column E for calendar year 2021. That's approximately $100,000 higher than what the county's revised test column is estimating in their revision of 30,492,700. So again, we're hoping the board considers the actual trend of this property over the last 3 years, and the effects COVID has had on both gross potential income and the net operating income, the total income that this property is able to generate.
I just want to say one. Yeah, this is the perfect case of what Greg talked about in the last case. If you look at column 7, and let's just focus on column 7 for a minute, which is the gross potential income. The gross potential income was 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5 in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And last year it came in and said, look, this 2.5 is an inflated number. Things are getting worse. So that came true, and it dropped to 2.3, basically back to 2018 levels. The assessor's saying, no, we revised it, and their revision is higher than 18, it's higher than 19, and it's higher than 21. It's basically using what happened in 2020. Remember, in 2020, people weren't allowed to leave their apartments. They didn't, in transporting ourselves back to that time in July, people weren't going out and going into new buildings and saying, let's see what else is out there. They were basically stuck where they were. And then once they first had the chance, and we told you this last year, once they first had the chance, they then went out, and there was an influx of new properties coming online and people moving and other amenities, and rents dropped. And we know that. Like that's not controversial, I don't think. And here we are, we're showing it to you, and we say, look, now the gross potential income is 2.345 million, and the assessing no, but we know things are going to go back up because things were good before then, so we're going to use 2.5 million, which just doesn't match. It just doesn't, even with only a 5.7% vacancy in column E, the NOI reported here is 1.56. The assessor's using $100,000 higher than that for a value that's $480,000 per unit. Kind of back to the test that Greg ran last week. Does it make sense? Things go up, things go down. I get that point. I'm not going to spend the little time I have basically speaking to Chris through this vehicle. Happy to answer any questions if you have any, but this is exactly what we said would happen last year, and the response was, well, we'll consider it when we see it, and here it is. And next year, if things go back up, then the values will go back up next year. But we can't pay the taxes are being paid this year for the valuation of the property as of the 1st of 2020, not September of 2020 when Biden said that it's over or whatever. It's what we knew 9 months ago. And what we knew 9 months ago is we're still in the middle of this, and we have the most recent income. The most recent income produces a value of 1.5 million, an NOI 1.5 million. So I don't understand how we could possibly value it at 1.6 plus, seeing what the trend is. Any investor coming in here is going to say, okay, it was 1.7, now it's 1.5. There's a downward trend here. There's more risk. Not, well, let's just assume it's going to go right back up, because it isn't, and it hasn't. And if you want Greg to talk about what we're seeing for 22, he can. I don't think it's relevant because last year we said we'll see it when we see it. But if you want him to, we can talk about that. If there is an understanding that everything's back up and everything is great, COVID was good for rentals, we can go into that. And if you want that, please ask the question, and Greg and Sophie can address that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Thank you. So yes, I did a rent analysis of this particular property, and we're projecting for January 1, 2022, because we're always living in the past. We've only have historical data. So take a look at column F. Yes, we did project for January 1, but also take a look at the vacancy that we used. It's substantially higher than what they're reporting. In fact, it's higher than what they've reported for the last 3 years. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, for the last 3 years to 4 years. And we also were pretty generous with our expenses that we used. In fact, if you note, column F, our expenses are higher than what's being reported in column E. But what I did do with that, the reason for using the expenses that I did is I took a look at the last 3 years, and I said, okay, what's going on here? So we've got 1 year it's a little bit higher, a little bit lower, and that's how I came up with the expenses at the 28.5%. We feel that the revised value of 30,492,700 is very fair and equitable for this property. If Chris wants, he's welcome to jump in and provide his
So when we
his
hear
information.
the agent for the owner, it's as if we didn't just speak exactly how we look at these. And again, the appeal is made to just focus on column E, just focus on 2021. Don't worry about the other years, or worry about them, but just pick out the years that show a decline. We don't do either one. We look at a 4-year history. We display whatever the owner displays to us. If we have a objection to certain items, we ask about them, we single them out, and we reconstruct columns without them. In this case, there's very little to argue about. We're actually looking at a stabilized property. And I wouldn't say that we see the same things in regards to year over year over year declines in growth. In fact, if we're looking at the same sheet, primarily the summary sheet, page 4, GPI grew from 19 to 20, the year of COVID. Now, as I recall, COVID, it was a little bit different than the appellants do. There was a thing called COVID flight, which was essentially where a lot of people, especially young people, fled the cities in droves, went home to live with their parents, went home to wherever they went, but they surely didn't stay in their apartments. When we're looking at this property stabilized, we can see that they actually did grow vacancy in 2020, true vacancy, by about, my calculations, I think it's 4%. That dropped again almost by half in 2021. We've seen this literally this year. We've seen this across the board. What did apartments do to increase occupancy? They lowered rents and they increased concessions. When you lower your rents, you make it a more attractable feature to move in. But again, given what we've seen of the history of this property, rents actually grew from 18 to 19 and again from 19 to 20. So they did drop in 2021. But again, if we're looking at a stabilized nature, Ms. Roskin's revision is spot on. Again, please note that we apply a guideline vacancy of 8% prior to year 2020, in which they did increase concessions. They were nowhere near 6%. So 8% is overly generous, but again, is applied as we're ad valorem property tax for mass appraisal purposes. As Ms. Roskin pointed out, the projection made for OPEX is higher than what has been achieved at the property in the last 2 years, higher than the 3-year average, and in fact higher, just shy of the 3-year average and higher than the last 2-year average. So even if we're asked and tasked with the idea of, okay, well, look at the most recent history, weigh 2021 more heavily. When you look at 2020 to 2021, we're well above that average, and we're well above what either year reported for OPEX. So again, Ms. Roskin is spot on. If we're looking at the NOI, again, Ms. Roskin noted that not only did the NOI trend down, we made adjustments for that. So again, if you look at the 3-year history and average out that NOI out, we're lower than that and higher than the 2-year. Again, indicating that we do believe, as we've stressed all year, that we do believe there will be an increase in rents achieved, especially given that they are at, I believe, at 2%, 3% vacancy, and we're applying 8%. And again, just looking at as I think the agents have called it, the smell test, or, is it reliable test? Ms. Roskin's revision is a 4% drop year over year. The appellants are asking for 21% in 1 year's time. It's just not keeping with the stabilized nature of what we do. That being said, we do believe that the revision is appropriate, and we ask that the board consider the revised value of $30,492,700. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Metzger.
My question is, I looked at the rent rolls and I see them for 2021 or 2022. Everything seems stable, but I'm thinking perhaps that the asking rents somewhere at the end of 2021, I guess, went down. I don't see a comparison between the last 2 years of asking rents for 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and all that stuff. Do you guys have that? Or are they steady? Did they go down? They go up? This is obviously for the appellant.
So there's a analysis that the county did that shows there's only a single one bedroom unit in the building, and it's leased for $1,795. That's, you can see on the county's page 6. They then take that space and apply $1,825 for it. So yes, there's a single unit, it's for lease. Somebody's renting it for $1,795, but they could get $1,825. So that's what we have there. There's the analysis that we were talking about is the one that starts on page 6, where the county said, these are the rents in place, contract rents in place for the units, and these are the averages, but then took about $100 more per unit than the average that you're seeing there. So that's what Blake was testifying to.
Well, I'd love to hear the county's response to that. What's this alleged plus up about?
Exactly, yes, sir. We've essentially talked about that. You know, we'd like you to view this the way we do. That's a historical document. This ended December 31st. So this is a snapshot of what they achieved from January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2021. We use this because it's the only information we have. We don't have the current year's 2022, so we use this to extrapolate out. We do believe, as we've done consistently, that this property, as is now well occupied, will have a better chance of increasing the rents, again, by modest 1 or 2%. Using the same numbers the appellants just did, we're suggesting that they'll increase that rent by $30. That seems fairly modest given what we believe has occurred in the actual year.
Right.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, Mr. Chica, or I'm sorry, Ms. Roskin, if you have any final comments?
No, I just want to reiterate that we feel like column F is a very reasonable revision for the subject. Once again, we're using 8%, which is for vacancy, which is much more than what was achieved the property in 2021. Also, our expenses are higher than what they're reporting, and we're just asking for the revision of $30,492,700. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Moore, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yeah, so again, just to repeat, similar to last year when we were here talking about 19 and 20, talking about the decreases in NOI, decreases in income, asking for the county to consider that this is going to continue to go down, downward trending, and the county had it experiencing on an upward trend, a rebound from COVID. Again, now this year we're showing that 3-year trend for most of the Ditmar properties, not just in 2020, now in 2021, and now the county is again, taking, assuming this property is going to increase dramatically year over year when it didn't last year, again, as we've stated, some of these issues are going to be continued to be experienced in the form of having to offer increased concession package to get people in the door and backfill vacancy, as well as the increased cost that Greg spoke to. Greg, I don't know if you want to close with anything specifically about this property.
And it is up.
Okay. All right. Okay. It's just among the board members then. What do we think, Mr. Metzgen?
Well, I'll start out the way Barnes often does. See what your reaction is to something. The revised I&E the county presents shows a very, very stable property over time. The one, and therefore it all makes sense to me, except that, and this is why I asked the question before about did asking rents go down last year, perhaps between from the year before, accounting for that 6% drop in rental income. That's the only thing that stands out to me is that 6% rental income. The department, once again, and this is reasonable to me, say, well, we're assuming the rents are going to go up 1%, maybe a little bit more. But in this case, from last year, it's up 6%. But it's only 1 year. So I'm going back and forth, 1 year doesn't make a 3 or 2 or 4 year trend, but it's noticeable. There's some allowance for the shakeup of COVID that is appropriate. So the question is, a 3.7% decrease proposed by the county, is that the appropriate number? You know, because again, I'm sorry, I know I'm torturing this. But otherwise, their numbers are very stable over time. So I don't know, does anybody see a blip because they got the owner got whacked in 2021 for income, or does this all make sense over time? They certainly didn't get whacked in the gloom and doom that we have here sometimes due to COVID. I got to shut up now. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, Ken, I'll share my analysis for what it's worth. What I looked at was column G, top line, the rental income of 2,207,000. And then the county has it going up to 2,350,000. And that's an increase of about 140. Divided by 66 units, each unit has to go up with rental to $2,121. Divide that by your 12 months. The rental income for each unit has to go up by $176 per month, which is pretty aggressive. But then what I did is I looked at vacancy, because I'm thinking, well, if you have empty units and you rent them, well, then that's going to take up some of that gap. And the actual the actual vacancy is 2.49. And when I look at past years, the vacancy's been low. So this is, pretty occupied. Now in the revision that the county did, they have 8% vacancy, and the difference is 140,000. And so to me, it's a wash.
Mm-hmm. Okay, other folks? Mr. Penaranda. Can you turn your microphone on?
Sorry about that. Yeah, that's pretty much the same thing I did. I looked at the rental rates, and but I totally agree with Barnes that I think it's a wash. The vacancy that the county is using is very generous, and if I were to redo these numbers, I would have even used a lower number on the expenses. I wouldn't have gone more than 28% based on the previous years and based on the average. I think 28.5 is more than generous that the county used. So I'm more than okay with the revised assessment.
Okay. I think Mr. Hoffman is agreeing with you, Mr. Yates. Okay, all right. Would somebody like to make a motion? Mr. Penaranda.
Sure, I'll move that we reduce the assessment to the revised number of $30,492,700.
A second.
Okay, a motion, a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The assessment's reduced to $30,492,700 based on the county's revised numbers. Thank you. Okay, moving along to case 5 on the agenda, RPC 200130009 at 470 North Thomas Street. Mr. Moore, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to direct the board to page 4 of 145, which is our summary of facts for this property. This is the Thomas Court Apartments located at 470 North Thomas Street. 1 RPC, currently assessed at, originally assessed at $22,996,600. The county is recommending a value of $20,126,200. Again, like to now direct the county or the board to the county's apartment I&E summary, located on page 3. The original assessment value for this property of $22,996,600 was an 8% increase from the prior year's 2021 assessment. Now the test column value, the revised value of $20,126,200 is a 5.4% decrease. Again, actual NOI that was reported in 2021 most recently was 12% decrease year over year from 2020 to 2021 now. So again, the county is making revisions. We don't think it's nearly enough to combat the trend that we're seeing year over year now for the last 3 years. The historical gross potential rent for this property was pretty stable in 2019 and 2020, 1.63 million in 2019, 1.636 million in 2020, and you'll see that drops down almost 130,000 to 1.5 million in 2021, column E. The county's revised column has a revised gross potential rent of $1,596,000, which again is about $100,000 higher than was most recently reported. The county again provided a rent roll analysis on page 6, showing the average rents per unit type, and if you were to annualize those average rents, you would get to a gross potential rent of $1,552,152, which is again below the county's revised test column for gross potential rent. Effective gross income, you'll see a 3-year downward trend again, $1,667,000 in 2019, $1,576,000 in 2020, and most recently down to $1,365,000 in 2021. The county's revised test column estimates EGI at 1.552 million, so almost 200,000 above what the county was, or what the property was able to generate most recently in 2021. Operating expenses, this property operated at 27% expense ratio in 2019, 28% increased to 28% in 2020, and most recently 34.4%. The county's revised test column uses a revised expense ratio of 30%. NOI, again, we're seeing a 3-year downward trend, 1.218 million in 2019, 1.133 million in 2020, and down to 895,512 most recently in 2021. Again, we're almost $286,000. The county's NOI estimated in column F, their test column, above what the property was able to actually generate most recently in 2021. Again, we're hoping the county considers the trend that all these properties have been experiencing in terms of their rent, their expenses, and the net operating income achieved over the last 3 years. Greg and Sophie, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add specifically about this property. This is another property that the county classifies as mid-rise. We're not going to get into that today, although we do think it is still a very pertinent issue, because basically classifying this as mid-rise because it has an elevator and would change the value, essentially $5 to $6 million value in an elevator, $5 to $6 million if this was to be used and valued by the county based on their garden style apartment guidelines for these types of properties. So again, we're hoping that the board considers the actual trend of this property, the increased expenses that it's trending in their analysis on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county.
Thank you. I hate to say this again. This is another instance where there's an error in column E with the vacancy. Once again, I'm not familiar with how Ditmar reports their vacancy. And so you need to remove $98,515 from that vacancy, which is going to increase, once again, your EGI and your NOI by $98,515. I'll let you do the math on that. And that's in column E. So basically, for column F, our revision, all right, once again, we're trying to project here for January 1. 2022, and we're looking at historical data. And yes, we did get a chance to take a look at the new information. We're using a higher vacancy rate than what they're reporting, and what was at 8%, excuse me, at 8% versus their 7.6%. And look, and our expenses are in line. We feel that the revised assessment of $20,126,200 is very reasonable for this property when you take a look at the historical information, even looking, if you wanted to discard 2018 and just look at 2019 and the trend from 2020 to 2021, we feel that column F is very reasonable. And once again, I'll ask Chris if he wants to contribute. Thank you.
Yeah, just kind of hammer home what we've been talking about. Again, this is very similar to the properties we've heard today, very similar to properties you've heard all year. You know, we'll keep saying it because I'm not sure that the message is received, at least by the appellants in their ownership. 1 year does not an assessment make. We are going to look at all of the years presented in a 4-year history. And that's how it's always going to be. It's next year is going to be, we lose 18 and it'll be 19 through 22. And that'll continue to be the way that stabilized assessments we viewed. Given that, we do believe that there's a little bit of misstatements by the appellants in the sense that this isn't a year-over-year trend. Again, if we're looking at the historical operating GPI, the GPI increased 18, 19, 19 to 20. It dropped in 2021. So if there's any trend, it's 1 year out of the last 4 went down. The other 3 went up. Same thing, a similar thing, I should say, with effective gross. Effective gross increased from 18 to 19. It did drop in 2021, and you'll note that the biggest reason, of course, is the vacancy increased by essentially doubled, went up to almost 8%. As Ms. Raskin noted, unfortunately, there is an error listing for column E, and that should be down in the area of 2%. Again, if you look at the rent roll, there are only 1 vacancy noted as of January 1st, 2022. Highly stabilized property in regards to its ability to fill up. When we're looking at the rents, again, there's some comment made, the projections are too wild. If you look at the projection made by the county in column F, line 1, it's barely above what they achieved in 2018. It's below what they achieved in 19. It's below what they achieved in 2020. So again, looking at historical data, it's very much in reason to project that they'll go up 2 or 3% based on the fact that they've now stabilized the property at 2% vacancy. Again, as Ms. Raskin noted, looking at the operating expense, if anything, again, Ms. Raskin was aggressive in her revision for operating expense projection. It's 4,000 shy, less than 4,000 shy of what they achieved in 2021, and that's higher than they've achieved over the last 4 years. So again, rather than even stabilize it, she went right for that number, essentially allowing for the idea of growth based on what they've done historically. Same idea when looking at the history of the property with regards to the net operating income. If we're to look at it as an average, we're spot on. And again, the only way you could look at that and say, well, the trend is down is by only isolating year 2020 and 2021. We believe that's inappropriate. We've asked the board again to look at the history. We're fine with the idea of placing more weight on 2021 and less weight on 18, but still we ask you to bring into your thoughts and ways of reasoning is years 19, 20, and 2021. Again, based on the projections made by the county, we do believe that Ms. Roskin's almost 5.5% decrease is more in touch with the reality of the situation, what occurred in year 2021, and well above 25% decrease as projected by the appellant. That being said, we do believe $20,126,200 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
A question for the appellant. Shame on me, I go by these all the time. How many stories is it from grade? Is it 2 or 3? These buildings?
4 stories.
I'm even more embarrassed than I guessed. All right, thanks very much.
Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, this is for Chris. Chris, the this cap rate also assumes a replacement.
Yes, sir. All cap rates for multifamily assumes that 0.2%.
Okay. So dollars, how many would it be, the replacement on this particular project?
Absolutely, that would be $40,252.
Okay, thank you.
Sir.
Okay, any other questions? No, Ms. Roskin, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Okay, once again, we feel that our income is very reasonable in column F, our revision. And once again, we're giving a greater vacancy, a stabilized vacancy than what they're incurring at the moment. And our expenses are in line with the 2021 and much higher than what is being reported historically. And so we feel that column F's revised value of $20,126,200 is a very reasonable revision for the subject. And once again, I'm just pointing out column E, we have an error of $98,515 for the vacancy. So you need to increase your EGI and your NOI in that column by $98,515. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yeah, so we acknowledge the county's effective gross income total, and that can be recognized if you look on page 97 of 145, which was the appellant's and owners I&E survey that was submitted. The effective gross income is approximately $1,463,000, which is, again, still is above $100,000 above the county's revised test column in F. And the NOI as reported on page 98 of 145 is $994,000. Again, almost $100,000 below what the county is currently estimating in their revised test column. Again, we're not hoping that the board is just considering a 1 year, but we are hoping that the board is looking at the trend that this property has been operating under in terms of the effective gross income, expenses, increasing expenses, and the downward trending net operating income for this location. And again, we feel that that is not being appropriately recognized by the county in the current assessment or their current revised assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's just among the board members. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Hoffman.
I mean, we voted to reduce slightly last year to the 21,278, and I think nothing's really happened that, in my opinion, would reduce the value further from where it stood a year ago. It seems like a very stable property. Areas amenitized, you get the non-metro cap rate, but realistically, people could get to metro, and there's a lot of jobs within walking distance. Mid-rise living in a high-rise area that appeals to a lot of people, and having big units with lots of parking on site. I mean, this is a bond, and this is a very good property. So I don't see how there's a declining trend.
Let's see.
Okay, Mr. Matskin.
I agree with everything Greg said, and yet the assessment has gone down for the revision almost 5.5%, which I think is legitimate. I mean, things were a little bit scary last year, and this owner and many apartment building owners didn't do as well as they would like, and certainly hadn't done as well as they had in immediate prior years. And I think the county's revised assessment shows that. Too many appellants forget, though, of course, that when things get better, the trend, a downward trend, also drags the increase of assessments back farther than they would had things been going well. Let me state that differently. Looking at things over multi-years, now is not a good idea because last year was relatively far down. But if next year or this year is relatively far up, it's not going to balloon the assessment. So sometimes owners get the benefit of long-term thinking, and sometimes they don't. But this is relatively stable, and a 5.4% decrease is I think appropriate. One other thing, if I could just read my writing. And my fault. I can't read it. I'm good with it. This seems very appropriate for a very. I wanted to thank the appellant for not revisiting the contentions that we had last year and the year before about what's a mid-rise and what's a garden style. They mentioned that they're not going to fight it, and I appreciate that because I think we've established appropriately the board and the department on what is a mid-rise and what isn't. And I'm glad we got past that. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
No.
No? Okay. I think we're all in agreement. Would somebody like to make a motion here? Mr. Hoffman.
I'll make the motion to accept the county's reduced number of 20,126,200.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Yates. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. It's unanimous. It's reduced, the county's revised number of 20,126,200. Thank you. Brings us to the final case of RPC 32024-002 at 2300 24th Road South. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to start on page 71 of 162, which is our summary of facts for this location. This is the Dolly Madison Apartments located at 2300 24th Road South, consistent of one taxable RPC. The current assessment, now this is what we have on our original assessment that we have here of 89,263,100. That's including the rehab exemption. So I guess the full market value and this is what the county lists in page 1 is 110,455,700, and they are recommending a revision down to 102,255,300. This is an older property that was originally built in 1967 and most recently renovated in 2007. 362 total units, a high-rise apartment in the Knox submarket, one building, 12 stories, and 4.35 acres. Consists of a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartment units. And from there, I'll direct the board's attention again to page 3, which is the apartment income and expense summary sheet. The original assessment value of 110 million was a 3.7% increase from the prior year. However, the county's test column of 102,255,300 represents a 4% decrease from the 2021 assessment. Again, when you're comparing that to the actual NOI from 20 to 2021, the actual NOI year over year decrease from 20 to 21 was 13%. So again, we don't feel that the county is revising nearly enough in comparison to what the property is trending and what the property most recently reported in terms of income. The gross potential rent, the apartment again is experiencing a 3-year downward trend in apartment rent from 8.26 million in 2019, 8.1 million in 2020, and most recently 7.8 million in 2021. The county's revised gross potential rent for the apartments of 8.365 million is approximately $565,000 higher than what was actually reported most recently again in 2021. The effective gross, again, on a 3-year downtrend from 19 to 21, 8.8 million, down to 8.1 million, and now most recently 7.7 million. The county's revised test column for EGI of 8.3 million is $570,000 higher. Operating expenses, 30% in 2019, 31% in 2020, and 36% in 2021. The test column is using a 32%. And again, they're approximately $100,000 below what was actually reported in column E of 2.76 million. NOI, again, a 3-year downward trend from 6.26 million down to 5.65 million, and now most recently 4.9 million. The county's test column estimates a net operating income of 5.6 million. So again, we're almost $700,000 above what this property was actually able to generate most recently in 2021. Now, this is one as well where the county, and we've contested this over the years, the county applies an effective age of a 2007 cap rate of 5.5%, effectively saying that the building was, when it was renovated in 2007, was raised and built from the ground up, and not renovated. So we think a more appropriate cap rate would be in the 1980 to 1989 effective range. So again, acknowledging that the property was renovated, but acknowledging also that the property has the same foundations, materials as a 1960 build. All that being said, this is in terms of just looking at the net operating income on this one for the 3-year trend and where we are in 2021, most recently, the actual reported income in comparison to the county's test column. There's a big gap here of almost $700,000 in income. Happy to take the board's questions. I don't know if Greg or Sophie, you want to add anything additionally here prior to wrapping up?
No, you covered everything, Blake. We're good.
And with that, we'll defer to the county.
Okay. Questions from board members?
May I present then?
I'm sorry. I did this to you last week too.
It's okay.
Is Ms. Roskin not on? You're presenting?
This will actually be my case.
Oh, okay. All right. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, so I think the board is fairly familiar with this. Appreciate Mr. Warren's summation for the most part. We view it a little bit differently in regards to, again, its potential. As the board knows, we do look at its potential. One of the things I thought was unique with this one, and you'll see on page 6 of 162 is the rent roll that we reconstructed. Now, we've been consistent in talking about our thoughts, our projections, if you will, and again, modestly projecting 1-2% increases based on what we understand of the marketplace. I'd ask the board to note these aren't grown at all. These are pulled directly from the rent roll as of December 31st, 2021. And I did that somewhat purposefully in the sense that when we're looking at what that potential is, this is essentially, again, stating what they have already achieved, if you will. So this is proof positive of what they're actually getting. I believe these rents are going to grow. And again, the reason I do that is not so much to be a smart ass as it is to kind of point out that if anything, my projection is low. Again, if you follow the same logic that we've used historically, which is that this is almost assuredly going to grow 1, 2, 3%. So that projection you see in column F, line 1, is literally from the rent roll. The rest of the income is very much stabilized data that you've seen how we do. We look at the history, what they've achieved, parking, the utility reimbursements, and of course, other miscellaneous income. The counties, the board members are familiar with our application of the guideline vacancy and concession. Again, I would note, ask the board to note as well that the vacancy has not been an issue at this property. And in fact, as we've talked about previously, this vacancy is now down to 3%. As we saw in years previous and in properties previous, mostly by this owner, you apply a greater amount of concessions and drop your rents and traditionally your occupancy is going to grow. That's what we saw in year 2021. The occupancy went down, concessions went up, and rents went down accordingly. We do believe, again, as we've said consistently, that at a 3% vacancy, that it'll be easier for them to increase rents. And again, given that my projection is with no increase at all, you can kind of do the math and see that if anything, again, we're probably low. Our effective gross is very much in line with what's been achieved at the property, especially considering the drop in 2021, but again, the increase in 2019. Looking at operating expenses, again, the board is familiar with us stabilizing that number. We don't match dollar for dollar with what they report. We do ask questions if there's anything that's unusual or strange. You know, as you can see with the highlighting and percentage increases year over year, I did note the biggest increases were to janitorial, which is a little unusual, but again, given that it's gone up 4 years in a row, we'll see where that continues to go. Increases to property and insurance, that's not that unusual with what I've seen again this past year or two, either due to COVID or restructuring. Many properties are increasing their insurance. Again, not that unusual. I did notice the 12% increase in admin. The only real number that stuck out to me was advertising. Again, to me, that goes hand in hand with the idea of advertising your available units more. It appears to have worked. They lowered their vacancy number and increased their occupancy. My point of bringing that up is to see if that's something that would be a stabilized number, if that's something that'll drop off. Generally speaking, you don't want to spend more than you need to get bodies in the door. If the advertising worked, it may stick around, it may not. All that being said, you can see that we did apply a fairly generous increase from our January 1 projection in column F that led to the NOI projection made. So again, in summation, the projections made on the income level are in line with what's been achieved historically or derived directly from the rent roll with no increase made for apartment revenue projection. We're using guideline vacancy and concession well above what's been achieved historically at that property. And again, operating expenses are in line. Just to touch on, I really hope we're not revisiting this again, especially given that the properties enjoyed, 13 years or so of the rehab exemption. But we believe we covered this last year. To cover our bets, we did include all of the documentation that the ownership submitted to the county in regards to the amount of work that they wanted to do and the scope of renovation. I believe that begins on page 31. But I will highlight, obviously, one of the summation is at page 42, where they list that they will spend $46 million on the renovation. Yes, we agree that the foundation was not renewed, a report or what you will. But again, any of those who have experience in commercial real estate know that that's almost literally physically impossible to replace a foundation and nothing else. So in a sense, what we've argued is that that $46 million went into everything else. So please do read over that documentation and listing of all the elements that were changed, replaced, or updated, or added, I should say. Given that, we do believe that the revision applied in column F is appropriate. I believe Mr. Warren touched on it, but I'll note again, our revision calls for a 4% decrease year over year. The appellants are asking for 20.4% decrease. It's not in touch with what's going on sort of on the ground, especially not in touch with what's going on as far as a stabilized property. We do believe that the revised value of $102,255,300 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll have questions from the board. Anything? No? Okay, Mr. Chikas, any final comments?
No, ma'am. Just, I talked a lot. I apologize. Please try to keep all that information in mind. Note that the, again, projections made are without any growth and operating expenses much in line with what's been reported. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, any final comments in your minute, please?
Just to respond on the vacancy, the county had indicated that vacancy has not really been an issue here because of the concession packages that are being offered to backfill that space, and that's true. But there's also, I think what you need to take into account is how that impacts. I think Chris had indicated this in our last hearing that. To offer those concession packages and backfill that space, and then the tenants don't typically leave often. And Greg testified to the opposite of that fact. Is what you were seeing now is these tenants jumping from building to building for the newest concession package each year, and you're kind of seeing that here. If you look at column A in 2018, they offered pretty substantial concessions of 270,000 with total vacancy of 4%. That vacancy dropped to 1.87% the following year. So maybe there was a little bit of that where they stayed at least for the short term. But what you're seeing now is large concession packages needing to be provided to, again, backfill a continuously vacating tenant base. 251,000 in 2020 at 7.35%, and that increases pretty substantially to 420,000 in 2021, and you're still sitting at 8.5% vacancy. Again, the revised effective gross income is $570,000 higher than the county's test column here, and actual NOI experiencing a significant downward trend in overall net operating income, and what this property is able to generate is almost $700,000 below what the county is currently estimated in revised column F.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members now. Where is everybody in this? Mr. Matzkin.
Every case that we've heard today, I guess appropriately, is that the appellant suggests that the department doesn't take seriously enough or weight enough the 2021 income, rent income, because these are all very, very similar cases. And the county responds, well, we don't go 1 year. We don't agree with the appellant's projection for 2022, just taking over the achieved income from 2021. We smooth it out, we average it, take it over time, but we take seriously that 2021 was a little unusual because of COVID. So I did that. In this case, though, the different than the others, the income projected, I'm sorry, in column F, the revised, is actually higher than anything that they've achieved before this apartment. So I did average it out and then plussed it up a little bit, and that created a deduction of $265,000 for the income in the revision. And again, it's higher than the average of the 4 years, 2018 through 2021 inclusive, but still not nearly as high, but as I said, 265,000 less than what is in column F. So I capped that and took off the rehab exemption, all that kind of good stuff. And I got the NOI then is 5,359,000 and change. And the assessment for the rehab is about 97,500,000, a little less. But then I capped it out to 76,374,500. Again, only because I reduced in the revision the amount of income to a number higher than the average over the 4 years.
Okay. All right, other folks? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, and I can't remember exactly what I did, kid, because I did this last night and I didn't take good enough notes. I ended up at around 98,667,000. What was your figure, Ken?
Before the exemption, 97,437,200.
437 even.
200, but
okay.
Friends can round off.
Yeah,
and then of course I deducted.
All right, let's see what other folks have before we start agreeing or disagreeing. Okay, Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, as in the previous two cases that we saw, I think the county has been generous in using the vacancy and the expenses. The 36% expenses that they had last year, I don't think is reflective of anything that has happened before. From 2014 to 2018, I think they were between 24, 27%. They went up to 29%, 30, 31%. But so if I were to use the expenses based on the history, I would have used 31%. And I think that the vacancy that the county used at 8% is, both numbers to me, in my opinion, are generous. And the income that is reflected, if you look at the GPI, it's what they achieved in 2019. So I'm okay with the revised assessment. I think it's a generous number.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I agree with Jose. I would have been okay with something closer to where we were at in 21.
Okay,
I agree with Jose also. It's the same way I looked at it.
all right, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, the increased rent though is like 500, and it just seems to me that's a little bit aggressive on the part of the county to assume it will go up that much. So I guess this is the one time where I might go with the lowering, but it looks like I'll be outvoted.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Barnes,
believe Mr. Yates.
look at the EGI, and I don't think they're that far off. And I understand your point about the rent increase, but
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, I believe you have consensus here. Somebody like to make a motion?
I mean, I've been doing most of them, but I'll go ahead and make the motion to reduce the assessment to the revised number of 102,255,300 before the rehab.
Okay, I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so it's 4-2. That's no Ken, or Mr. Metzgen and Mr. Lawson. The assessment's reduced prior to the exemption to 102,255,300 based on the county's recommendation. That completes the agenda. Does anybody have any business?
Thank you, board members. Thank you, Blake.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lawson?
Yeah,
Thank
Mary,
you.
I was wondering, tomorrow is in person, correct?
It is in person, yes.
Oh, okay. I've got to be out in Fairfax first thing. If I do get finished early enough, could I join the meeting virtually here in my office? It would save probably a half an hour.
Okay, well, let's see. Does everybody else, who's going to be here tomorrow? We've got Jose, we've got Mark, we've got Ken, we've got Greg will be there. So yes, you could.
Okay,
There
great.
would be 4 people. So I'll just put on here that you'll be late, but you'll be virtual.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you are welcome. Anything else from anybody else? No? Okay, then we will stand adjourned at 10:48 and re-adjourn tomorrow morning, Wednesday, the 28th at 9 a.m. We'll see everybody there. Thanks.
Thank you.